Thomas Hale was a man of small tools and big silences. In his shop, the air always smelled of oil and cedar shavings, of gears and dust polished thin by his hands. He was the town's clockmaker, the one who wound the great tower bell, who fixed wristwatches for children and grandfathers alike. But since his daughter, Lily, had died, the ticking in his shop no longer comforted him. It mocked him. Time had betrayed him. Time had stolen. And so he decided to remake time in her shape. He worked through nights, his eyes raw, his fingers blistered. He carved her face from maple wood, soft as memory, her curls etched in spirals along her cheeks. He built her frame tall and narrow, a standing clock with a pendulum where her ribs would be. He placed gears where her heart once beat. When he set her eyes, glass marbles the color of summer sky, he whispered, "Breathe for me, Lily." The clock answered, tick, tick. Each tick sounded not like brass, not like steel, but like a heartbeat. Slow, gentle, familiar. Thomas wept into his hands. Lily. Days passed, and the clock filled the shop with more than ticking. At noon, it chimed, and the sound was her laugh, the light, bright laugh of a child racing through fields. At night, when the pendulum swung in the dark, he swore he heard her sigh, restless, as she used to when sleep came slowly. The town began to whisper. They said Thomas had gone mad, speaking to his machines, but he didn't care. Each morning he greeted the clock. "Good morning, my Lily." Each night, he kissed the wood above her carved forehead. "Sleep well, my Lily." And always she answered, tick, tick, chime, laugh. But all clocks wind down. One winter evening, as frost glazed the window panes, Thomas sat by the fire and heard the ticking falter. The pendulum dragged, slow as a dying breath. The gears groaned. The hands trembled on the face. And then, "Father," said a voice. Thomas froze. The voice was not in his mind. It came from the gears, from behind the wooden lips he had carved. The sound was faint, like wind through keyholes, but it was heard. "Don't let me stop." His blood turned cold. "Lily? Please, don't let me stop." He rushed to the clock, fumbling for his winding key. His hands shook as he turned it, feeding the gears, tightening the spring. The pendulum jerked back into rhythm. Tick, tick. The heartbeat returned. The voice sighed, softer now. "Thank you, Father." Thomas dropped to his knees, clutching the wood. "I'll never let you stop, Lily, never." From that night on, he became a servant to her time. Each hour, he wound the clock, even when his fingers bled. He polished the wood until it gleamed like skin. He whispered stories into the gears as if reading her to sleep. But the more he wound, the more she spoke. "Father, I'm cold." He wrapped the clock in blankets. "Father, I'm thirsty." He wept, for how could wood drink? Yet he brought a glass of water, setting it at her feet. "Father, I'm lonely." He pressed his face against the wood until splinters dug into his cheek. "I'm here, Lily, always here." Weeks passed. Thomas grew pale thin, a ghost among his own clocks. The townspeople knocked, but he did not answer. And then, one night, as snow fell heavy outside, the voice came again. Stronger now, fuller. "Father, let me out." Thomas shuddered. "Out? I don't want to live in the gears. I don't want to swing on the pendulum. I want to walk. I want to breathe." His heart raced. I can't. "Lily, you can? You built me. Build me again." The pendulum struck hard against its casing. A hammer on iron. Tick, tick, faster now, like a racing heart. "Let me out." Thomas staggered back, staring at the wooden face he had carved. For the first time, it didn't look like Lily. It looked stretched, warped. A mask twisted by the strain of too much life forced into too little wood. The hands on the clock spun wildly, minutes vanishing in seconds. The chime rang, not laughter now, but a scream. "Father, let me out." The gears ground, the casing shook, the marbled eyes rolled in their sockets, and then the ticking stopped. The silence was a grave. Thomas reached out with trembling hands. The key slipped from his grasp. He fumbled, desperate, trying to wind her back. "Lily, please," he whispered, "please don't leave me." But no voice answered. Only stillness, only silence. The next morning, the townsfolk found Thomas slumped against the clock, his head resting on its wooden shoulder, eyes open but unseeing. The shop smelled of cedar, dust, and something bitter, like burned metal. The clock's hands no longer moved. But sometimes, at midnight, when the streets are empty and the wind holds its breath, a laugh echoes faintly from the shop. A child's laugh. A clock's laugh. A child's laugh. A clock's laugh. A child's laugh. A clock's laugh. The silence was a grave. Thomas reached out with trembling hands. The key slipped from his grasp. He fumbled, desperate, trying to wind her back. "Lily, please," he whispered. "Please don't leave me." But no voice answered. Only stillness. Only silence. The next morning, the townsfolk found Thomas slumped against the clock, his head resting on its wooden shoulder, eyes open but unseeing. The shop smelled of cedar, dust, and something bitter, like burned metal. The clock's hands no longer moved. But sometimes at midnight, when the streets are empty and the wind holds its... Ethan was 12 when he found the radio. It was tucked away in the attic, beneath a blanket that smelled of dust and mothballs. The thing was heavy, wood-faced, its knobs tarnished green with age. The front grille was shaped like a cathedral window, the speaker hidden behind a mesh of faded cloth. "Does it still work?" Ethan whispered, wiping his hands on his jeans. He carried it downstairs, leaving a trail of dust on the carpet. His mother shook her head when she saw it. "That old thing? It belonged to your grandfather. I thought we'd thrown it out. Can I keep it?" Ethan asked. She hesitated, then shrugged. "If it even turns on." That night, while the house slept, Ethan turned the dial. The knobs crackled. The speaker hissed. For a moment there was only static, and then voices. Not music, not commercials, voices. "Turn down the lights, Margaret," one man said. His voice sounded sharp, angry. "I told you not to leave them burning." Another voice, softer, trembled. "I'm sorry, Charles. Please." A crash. A scream. Silent. Ethan's hands froze on the dial. The hair on his arms prickled. He twisted the knob again, searching. More static. Then laughter, thin and ghostly, rolling out of the speaker as if the air itself remembered. The next day, Ethan asked his mother about it. "Mom," he said, "did Grandpa ever have fights with Grandma? I mean, really bad fights?" His mother stiffened. "Who told you that?" "No one. I heard something on the radio." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Your grandfather had a temper. Don't go digging into things best left buried." But that night, when she thought Ethan had gone to bed, he heard her whisper on the phone. It was in the attic again. He found it. The second night, the radio spoke louder. He turned the dial slowly, and voices poured out like ghosts lined up to confess. "I stole the money from the bank," said a man whose voice cracked with guilt. "No one will ever find it." A child sobbed. "I didn't mean to push her. She fell. She hit her head." Ethan's hand shook. He wanted to turn it off, but he couldn't. It was as if the radio had its own gravity, pulling him closer. And then he recognized a voice. His mother's. "I wish he'd stop asking about the past," the voice said. "I wish the boy would just forget." The sound cut off, static rushing in its place. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He lay staring at the ceiling, the radio whispering in the corner of his room, even though he hadn't touched the dial. The third night, the broadcast changed. No longer past. Now they were things that hadn't happened yet. "The storm will strike tomorrow," said a man on the radio. "The old oak tree will fall across the road, and the Miller boy will be trapped in his car." The next day, it happened. The storm, the tree, the Miller boy. Ethan was terrified, but the pull was too strong. Each night, he listened. The mayor will resign in shame. The grocery will burn. A child will vanish by the river. Each prophecy came true. The town began to whisper about curses, about omens, but no one knew about the radio upstairs, whispering the future through Ethan's walls. And then, one night, it happened. Ethan turned the dial. Static. Crackle. And then a voice. His own voice. High, thin, trembling. "I don't want to die," it said. Ethan froze. The broadcast continued. "The boy will be found in his room, face pale, hands clutching a radio that would not stop speaking. They will say his heart gave out. They will bury him beside the grandfather who heard the voices first." Ethan screamed, yanking the plug from the wall. The radio went dark. For the first time in nights, the room was silent. He sat in the dark, shaking, his breath. The house had been waiting. It stood at the far end of Willow Street, shutters sagging, paint peeled like old skin. The Forrester family thought it looked charming in the way haunted things sometimes do. A bargain. "Plenty of space for the kids," Mr. Forrester said. "And character," added Mrs. Forrester. The children, Daniel and Ruth, only nodded, their eyes drifting to the windows that seemed too wide, too dark, as if the house had been staring at them long before they'd arrived. They signed the papers. They carried in their boxes. The house sighed as they closed the door behind them. At first, it was only little things. The shadows stretched too long in the evening, bending where they shouldn't bend. When Ruth turned her head, She thought she saw her shadow shake its head instead. Daniel waved at himself on the wall and swore his shadow didn't wave back fast enough. Old houses settle strangely, Mrs. Forrester said. She smiled, though her own shadow lingered on the kitchen floor, half a second too long, its lips still parted when hers had already closed. By the second week, the whispers began. At night, when the house was dark, the walls seemed to murmur, not the groans of wood, but something softer, slyer. Words hissed low, just out of reach. Daniel pressed his ear to his bedroom wall and swore he heard his name. Ruth heard giggling in the hall, though she was alone. Mr. Forrester muttered in his sleep, "Not yet, not yet." Only Mrs. Forrester pretended nothing was wrong, but sometimes she caught her shadow in the mirror, lips moving though she said nothing. By the third month, the shadows no longer waited. In the parlor, Mr. Forrester's shadow sat down before he did, crossing its legs with a smug slowness. At dinner, Ruth's shadow snatched a fork and twirled it in its fingers before she even reached for one. One afternoon, Daniel screamed. He'd been brushing his teeth when his shadow, still clutching the toothbrush, turned and grinned at him. "Mom," he cried. Mrs. Forrester ran upstairs. She saw nothing, just her son pale and shaking. But when she passed the hallway mirror, her shadow paused. It looked at her with something that was not her smile. Then came the peeling. It started in the cellar. The walls sweated darkness, and the family watched in horror as their silhouettes shivered loose. They stretched like wet paint dripping down a wall, pulling themselves up and away. Ruth fainted when her stepped forward, arms reaching. Daniel tried to run, but his own shadow blocked the stairs, grinning with teeth blacker than night. The shadows whispered all at once, a chorus of hungry voices. "We've waited long enough." The last the neighbors saw of the Forrester family was candlelight flickering in the windows, strange and long. Then the house went quiet. No footsteps, no laughter, just stillness. When the realtor finally unlocked the door weeks later, the rooms were empty. No furniture, no boxes, no Forrester family. Only the walls were crowded with shapes, outlines of people caught mid-breath, mid-step, mid-scream. The shadows had found their places. And if you passed the house at dusk, you might glimpse them in the windows, shadows smiling, waving, beckoning you inside. October in Willowbrook always felt borrowed. The air was too sharp, the trees too bright, the pumpkins too orange, as if the season knew it was on loan from winter. And always, when the first frost threatened, the knocking began. The town had whispered about it for generations. A stranger at the door asking politely, almost kindly, to be let inside, a weary traveler, a lost man, a guest. But those who opened their doors never lived to see the thaw. The Harrington family had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. But stories were for children and firesides, not for the real world. On the last week of October, they sat in their warm kitchen, father stirring his coffee, mother stringing cranberries for the mantel, two children hunched over homework. The pumpkins sagged on the porch, their carved mouths drooping, their insides turning to mush. That was when the knock came. 3 slow raps. The house shivered. "Probably a neighbor," Mr. Harrington said, though his voice was thin. Another knock followed, heavier this time, rattling the glass. Mrs. Harrington's hands stilled on the thread. "We shouldn't answer." The children stared at the door, wide-eyed. The oldest whispered, "It's him." Mr. Harrington forced a laugh. "Nonsense." But he didn't move. Outside, the air grew colder. Frost crawled up the porch railing. The pumpkins blackened before their eyes, collapsing inward, as if the knock itself had rotted them. "Let me in," a voice called. Soft, gentle, almost pleading. The family froze. "Please," the voice continued. "The night is long. The air is cruel. Let me warm myself by your fire. I ask only until dawn." The youngest child began to cry. Mrs. Harrington clutched her husband's arm. "Don't." But the knock came again, louder, shaking the walls. The debate began in hushed, frantic voices. What if it's just a man? What if he's freezing out there? Mr. Harrington argued, though sweat dampened his brow. "And what if it's him?" Mrs. Harrington whispered. "You know the stories. They're stories. Stories with graves to prove them." The children whimpered, covering their ears as the knock grew like thunder, each blow scattering dead leaves from the porch into the air. At midnight, the fire guttered in the hearth. Frost spread across the inside of the windows. Their breaths came in pale clouds. And still the knocking went on. The voice was patient, calm. It never shouted, "Let me in," just until dawn. Finally, the children begged, "Make it stop. Please, Daddy, make it stop." Mr. Harrington rose, trembling. His wife grabbed his sleeve, eyes wet. "If you open that door, we're finished." He looked at her, then at the children, then at the door. The knock came again. No one in town saw the Harringtons again. When neighbors grew curious, they found the house silent. The pumpkins melted into black husks. The windows coated thick with frost, though the air outside had turned mild again. Inside, the fire was ash, the beds unslept, the kitchen cold. Only the door told the story. Its wood darkened, warped as though something had seeped through, and in the frost on the glass, 5 handprints lingered, 2 large, 2 small, and one more pressed deep from the other side.